They didn't just poke the bear this time, they walked straight into a storm they may not survive. Because when a warning letter meets people who don't scare easily, it doesn't silence the noise, it detonates it. And right now, all eyes are locked on one explosive question. Did Meghan Markle's team just trigger the one fight that could drag everything into the light?
Why Meghan?
Well, because she poses a challenge to the royal family, and she's a fascinating person. I mean, she's a person who started from nothing and has become a world global star. And that route to the top has never really been properly reported and examined and investigated.
When I was pregnant, and Harry says, oh, there was a little discussion before we got married. Well, something's wrong right there, but anyway.
Well, of course, that was brilliant of you to bring that clip up, because the body language just showed her discomfort as she dug deeper into her own hole. I mean, the truth is this, that there are two truths. The first truth is that the conversation, I'm told and I believe, was very early on in their relationship when Harry is bowled over by Meghan, is desperately in love, and already is talking about...
It starts with a move that looked simple on the surface. Another legal nudge. Another attempt to shut things down quietly. But this time, the targets were not the usual voices. This time, it was Lady Colin Campbell and Tom Bower. And that changes everything. Because these are not people who panic. These are people who collect, who listen, who remember, who wait. And when they are pushed, they don't retreat, they sharpen. That's where the tension begins to thicken. Because suddenly, this is no longer just about gossip floating around the internet. This feels like pressure being applied in the wrong direction. Because when you challenge people known for digging, you don't bury a story, you risk turning it into an excavation. And the deeper it goes, the darker it gets. Think about what happens if this crosses into a courtroom. Think about the shift. No more controlled interviews, no more polished narratives, no more carefully managed appearances. Suddenly, everything becomes evidence. Every timeline, every message, every missing detail that people have whispered about for years, dragged out, examined, questioned, under oath. And that's the part no one can ignore, because once that door opens, it doesn't close easily.
But Radar Online, in fairness, they do quote you and say Royal Author Lady Colin Campbell recently challenged the conspiracy of silence and misinformation surrounding both tops.
Is it possible the ghostwriter dislikes Harry? I know people who know him. I've heard interesting things about him. I know he's, as I have said previously, very into the 12-step program and the whole druggy alky business. It is not the job of a ghostwriter to do anything but put the thoughts of the incompetent who requires a ghostwriter.
And then came the moment that froze everything. 4 words: cold, sharp, unbothered. Let him sue me. No hesitation, no fear, just certainty. The kind of certainty that doesn't shout, but echoes. Because when someone says that so calmly, it forces a question into the room that no one can escape. What do they know? And just when the tension couldn't get tighter, Tom Bower steps in and adds fuel that doesn't just burn, it spreads. Checks, he says, were made. Hospitals, London, California. But the real shock wasn't what was found, it was what wasn't. And that single idea, absence, lit a fire under everything. Because absence creates space. And in that space, speculation grows fast. Too fast. Gaps. Missing confirmations. Weak trails. These aren't answers. These are triggers. And once people start pulling on those threads, they don't stop. They can't stop. Because now the conversation isn't just curious, it's suspicious. And the questions start stacking. What is being protected? Why do certain details feel incomplete? Why does the same demand keep echoing louder? A simple release, a simple clarification, something clean enough to shut this down instantly. But it doesn't happen. And that silence doesn't feel neutral anymore.
Never intended to go to the Portland hospital. She intended to have the baby at home. We know that they deceived the public about the birth data and time of the whole event. So, and also, you know, even it goes down to the lawyer saying that in that statement, when they had that long attack on the Mail, which is astonishing, that Meghan, we know she lied.
On Bower, where he doesn't go there. He doesn't go there. But he does go there as far as the fact that they wanted to keep the birth private and all the secrecy around that, and even the fact that...
Because here's the truth most people don't say out loud, legal threats aren't always about winning a case. Sometimes they're about freezing the room, making people hesitate, making them second guess. And that strategy works until it doesn't, until it hits people who don't freeze. And that's when the power flips. Because if this turns into a real legal fight, the word that starts haunting everything is discovery. And discovery doesn't care about image. It doesn't care about reputation. It doesn't care about how a story sounds on television. It cares about records, messages, timelines, the raw material behind the narrative. And once lawyers get access to that, the story stops being controlled. It becomes exposed. Every statement can be tested. Every claim can be compared. Every tiny inconsistency suddenly becomes significant. Not dramatic, not emotional, just factual. And facts don't bend easily. That's why analysts keep repeating the same warning. If this fight goes all the way, it may open something far bigger than anyone expected. A door that doesn't just reveal answers, but raises even more questions.
Samantha only called herself Markle when Meghan was engaged to Harry, which Samantha says is a total lie. Interestingly, Samantha also says that Meghan's story about having a Ford Explorer where she could only get in through the boot was also untrue. She goes through a whole load of Meghan's lies. So by July, that is what the judge has said, these depositions, this cross-examination of Meghan will take place for the trial to start in October. So Meghan really has a problem because until today, her lawyers have been saying this is so ridiculous, we refuse to even engage with Samantha Markle.
Because in court, there's no hiding behind tone, no leaning on sympathy, no shifting the narrative mid-sentence. It becomes brutally simple. Show it, prove it, stand by it, or don't. And critics are already circling the same weak points, pointing to past legal battles as previews of what happens when pressure becomes real. Because once depositions begin, once sworn statements enter the picture, everything changes. The gloss disappears. The performance ends. What's left is structure, consistency, truth under pressure. And that's where this entire situation starts to feel unstable. Because Lady Colin Campbell and Tom Bower are not being dismissed as background noise. Their supporters don't see them that way. They see patterns, files, memory, persistence, people who don't just talk but build cases in public, piece by piece. And that perception alone makes this clash dangerous because now the focus has shifted completely. This is no longer about surface level chatter. This is about timelines, records, announcements, who said what and when, the kind of details that either hold a story together or pull it apart. And what makes it even more intense is how small things suddenly feel massive. A phrase in an announcement, a missing name, a break from tradition. Things that would normally pass unnoticed are now being dissected like evidence. Because when trust starts to crack, even ordinary details begin to look suspicious. And that's exactly what's happening. The silence that once protected the narrative is now feeding it. The control that once shaped the story is now being questioned, and the longer it goes without a clean, undeniable answer, the louder the noise becomes. Not proof, not closure, just persistent doubt. And doubt, once it takes hold, doesn't disappear quietly. It waits, it spreads, it grows. And right now, it feels like this story is only just beginning to unfold. And this is where it stops feeling like a simple clash of opinions and starts looking like a pressure cooker ready to crack. Because the longer this standoff drags on, the more it transforms from a media storm into something much heavier, something that feels like it's circling a point no one wants to reach, but everyone is watching anyway. The attention isn't fading, it's tightening, and every new reaction, every old clip resurfacing, every tiny inconsistency being replayed is adding another layer to a story that refuses to settle down. What makes it even more volatile is how the past keeps creeping back into the present. Moments that once passed quickly are now being dragged back into the spotlight and examined with a completely different lens. That awkward exchange after Archie's birth, where timing slipped for just a second, where two words didn't quite align the way people expected, they didn't seem explosive at the time. But now they feel like pieces of a puzzle people are desperate to solve. And once a moment like that gets labeled as a crack, it stops being small. It becomes symbolic. It becomes something people revisit again and again, asking the same question in different ways. Was that just a slip or something more? And this is how narratives shift without anyone officially changing them. It's not one big revelation escalation that flips everything upside down. It's accumulation, a slow build, a pattern forming where there wasn't supposed to be one. And once people believe they see a pattern, they stop trusting coincidence. They start assuming intention. They start connecting dots, even the ones that were never meant to be connected. And that is where things spiral beyond control. Because now it's not just about what was said, it's about what wasn't clarified. Not just what was shown, but what was withheld. And silence in this kind of environment stops feeling like neutrality. It starts feeling like strategy. Or worse, avoidance. And that perception, fair or not, is what fuels everything right now. Behind the scenes, the pressure is being described as intense, almost suffocating. The picture that's being painted is not of calm control, but of strain, of frustration, of someone watching their personal life turn into a public battlefield where every detail is being pulled apart by strangers who feel entitled to answers. And from that perspective, it's not hard to understand why legal action starts to look tempting. Because when words fail to shut something down, force feels like the next step. But that's where the risk becomes unavoidable. Because force, especially legal force, doesn't just push outward. It pulls inward. It demands things. It opens doors. And once those doors open, they don't just reveal what critics are saying, they reveal everything around it. Context, history, private exchanges, internal timelines, the kind of material that isn't meant to be seen, let alone challenged. And that's why the response from the other side feels so dangerous. Because there's no hesitation, no softening, no retreat, just that same steady energy that suggests they are ready for whatever comes next. Lady Colin Campbell didn't blink. Tom Bauer didn't recalibrate. If anything, the pressure seems to have sharpened their stance. And that sends a signal louder than any statement ever could. They are not afraid of escalation. Now the entire situation is sitting on a razor's edge. Because if the legal threat turns into legal action, everything changes. The conversation moves out of the public arena of opinion and into a structured environment where claims are tested, not just repeated, where narratives are dissected, not just defended. And that's where even the strongest image can start to weaken if it isn't backed by something solid. And hovering over all of this is a much bigger issue that keeps creeping into the conversation whether people want it there or not. The question of tradition, of rules that go back centuries, of expectations that were never meant to be flexible. The phrase people keep whispering about carries weight far beyond gossip, because once a story touches that territory, it stops being just about personalities. It starts brushing up against something institutional, something historical, something that doesn't tolerate ambiguity easily. That's why the palace silence feels louder than ever, because when the institution steps back and refuses to engage, it creates a vacuum. And in that vacuum, speculation doesn't just grow, it multiplies. People fill in the blanks, they interpret the quiet, they turn absence into meaning. And once that process starts, it's almost impossible to reverse. At the same time, the contrast between public images is becoming impossible to ignore. On one side, a steady, visible, almost predictable presentation of family life that leaves little room for doubt. On the other, a much tighter, more controlled narrative that offers fewer glimpses and more distance. And while there are valid reasons for privacy and a climate already thick with suspicion, that difference doesn't calm people down. It amplifies everything, because now every decision feels intentional, every absence feels deliberate, every delay feels strategic, and that perception is what keeps this story alive, feeding it with endless reinterpretation. The more it's managed, the more it's questioned. The more it's protected, the more people want to break through the protection. And then there's the part that no one can ignore anymore, the stakes, because this isn't just about reputation. It's about a brand, a carefully built image that has carried enormous value, not just emotionally, but financially. The narrative of truth, of resilience, of stepping away and still winning, that story has powered deals, appearances, influence. It has been the foundation of everything that came after the royal exit. But now, critics are arguing that foundation is starting to crack, not collapse, but shift. And even a small shift at that level can have consequences that ripple outward fast. Because once people start doubting the story, they start questioning everything built on top of it. That's why the reactions feel sharper now, more urgent, more aggressive. Because when the narrative is the asset, protecting it becomes the priority. And when that protection starts to look like resistance instead of clarity, it feeds the very thing it's trying to stop. And so the standoff holds. No resolution, no clear ending. Just two sides digging in, each convinced they can outlast the other. One side leaning on control, on legal pressure, on the hope that the storm will eventually burn itself out. The other side leaning on persistence, on questions, on the belief that time is exposing more than it's hiding. And in the middle of it all, the audience keeps watching, replaying, questioning, waiting. Because now the biggest question isn't what has already been said, it's what happens next. Does this stay in the realm of warnings and noise where everything is loud but nothing is proven? Or does it cross the line into something real, something formal, something that forces answers instead of speculation? Because if that line is crossed, the spotlight won't just get brighter, it will become unforgiving. And in that kind of light, every detail matters, every gap matters, every contradiction matters. And the real tension, the kind that keeps this story alive, is that no one knows who that light will expose the most.